I have a very important message to you. If you care about the state of democracy, then you have to be in favor of expanding the map of where we are fighting for voting rights in court. Welcome back to Democracy Docket. I'm Marc Elias.
And I'm Paige Moskowitz. Let's get started. Marc, you recently wrote a piece for Democracy Docket's premium members describing how we need to expand the map in order to truly protect democracy. What exactly did you mean by that?
Yeah, so, there's been a lot of discussion after the 2024 election about what the map looks like. And when we talk about the map, we're talking about the electoral map usually. We're saying, in the quest to get to 270 electoral votes, how many states are typically in the blue column, how many are typically in the red column, and how many are the so-called swing states. And there's a similar look when you talk about the House of Representatives, how many red districts are there, solidly blue districts, and then what are the districts in the middle? The Senate is probably the hardest one for Democrats because there's sort of a natural gerrymandering effect because you have large states that only have two senators like New York and California, whereas states like South Dakota, North Dakota, Wyoming, they also have two senators and tend to be more reliably red. So there's sort of a bigger existential map problem in some ways for the Senate than the House and the presidential. But in all of these, there's a constant discussion about the map. And I decided, along with the good folks at Democracy Docket, to do an analysis that looked at this sort of a different way, which is let's look at the voting rights litigation, and let's ask ourselves, where was there challenges to voter suppression laws or to the policies around voting or really anything related to how elections are conducted? And how do those map onto that electoral map? And finally, what's the conclusions to be drawn? So we did that project. And what it showed is that there is a great disparity about how much attention, how much litigation is focused on the swing states versus the non-swing states. And that has real consequences for democracy, for individual voters, and ultimately for competitive elections.
Right. So Democracy Docket did this analysis. We looked at all of the voting rights lawsuits filed between 2020 and 2024, and there were approximately 600 cases filed. 88 of those cases were filed in Pennsylvania. That is an extraordinary number of cases, but Marc, it kind of makes sense when you think of the traditional strategy of big swing states should get a lot of attention because that's where votes are at play, right? So 88 cases in Pennsylvania. That was followed by over 60 in Arizona, nearly 60 in Georgia, some in Nevada, and it kind of just drops down from there. The swing states got a lot of attention and then it drops, right? We're then talking about Montana getting 10. We're talking about Massachusetts getting 3. And then there were 3 states that didn't see any litigation at all: Maine, Oklahoma, and South Dakota. But Marc, I think the point you're trying to make is, why should a vote in Pennsylvania matter more to voting rights advocates than a vote in South Dakota?
Right. And that's the reason why I said you have to look at this in the context of expanding the map, because the natural answer is, yeah, but that's because Pennsylvania is like the ultimate swing state and South Dakota and Oklahoma are not. But in some sense, that begs the question of how a swing state becomes a swing state, right? Like, if no one is looking out for the voters, if no one is making sure that voters are able to vote and have their ballots counted, then a state that might otherwise have swing state like properties, right, might otherwise have closer elections, they wind up having less close elections because of voter suppression, because of election subversion, and because the voters, Paige, I think, intuit. They get the fact that no one is fighting for them, right? They know the fact that no one is worried about the fact that they are waiting in lines or they don't have drop boxes or it seems like voting or registering to vote is really hard. And, in politics, Paige, a lot of what matters to voters is not just the policy positions, but the idea that they are being valued, they are being talked to, they are being courted. And in the context of voting rights litigation and the work that lots of nonprofit organizations and partisan organizations do, they are being protected. Their votes are being valued. And I think, Paige, you and I hear this all the time in the comments we get from at Democracy Docket, in the reader input we get from our newsletters, and in the comments we get on YouTube videos.
We do. We hear it all the time, right? Like, why isn't there a lawsuit in X state? Why aren't you suing in my state? I'm having the same problems. as someone in Georgia or Pennsylvania? Why isn't there a lawsuit for me? So, Mark, I want to give a real world example. After the 2020 election, we saw a rush of states pass new voter suppression laws. One of the most popular trends in Republican controlled states was to ban ballot drop boxes.
Which I never understood, Paige. Like, why ballot drop boxes?
They're scared of metal bins. I don't know what to tell you. Something about a USPS blue mailbox, that's fine. Ballot drop box ruins our democracy, Mark, according to the Republicans. But we saw a lot of states move to ban ballot drop boxes. South Dakota passes a law to ban ballot drop boxes. South Dakota wasn't the only state to do this, right? Wisconsin moved to ban ballot drop boxes. Ohio did. The difference is that Wisconsin and Ohio got lawsuits trying to overturn that drop box ban, but South Dakota didn't.
Yeah, and there's no legal reason why it's really much different one or the other, right? I mean, either you are allowing people to return your ballots through a drop box or you're not. But there was obviously a lot of interest in Wisconsin. It's one of the top states, as I listed in my piece, for litigation over the last 4 years or so. And Ohio, there was litigation in part, I suspect, because there was a very competitive Senate race in Ohio. And so that brought attention. And you can see in the data in this piece, you look at some of the states and you say, oh, well, Montana's a little bit higher than I would have expected relative to some of the other states. Well, there was a competitive Senate race there. But the question is, why aren't we looking across the map and saying, look, maybe there needs to be more attention paid in some states, either because of a history of discrimination or because they are more important electorally or because voters of cause are more agitated about it, who knows. But we also need to look across the map, though, Paige, and just say, if there is a bad law for voting, it is just a bad law for voting. And it doesn't matter whether it's in a blue state or a red state. It doesn't matter whether it is in a state that is highly competitive or not highly competitive, because we're not going to instill a culture of democracy. We are not going to make voters believe that every vote counts if in their state they simply don't see any effort to protect them. And so, another example I point out in the piece is about the flurry of litigation that we saw in Pennsylvania and Georgia about their mail-in voting laws. But Indiana passed a restrictive mail-in voting law also, and there was no litigation over it. And again, we talk about what is a swing state. It wasn't that long ago that South Dakota had 2 Democratic senators. It wasn't too that long ago that Indiana had Democratic senators and Democratic House members and a Democratic governor. So what is a swing state is something that changes over time. And of course, people try to predict what the next swing state will be. But if you had asked people what the next swing state was, they probably wouldn't have said Georgia or Arizona. They might have said North Carolina or Texas, right? But then we saw Arizona and Georgia rocket up. Now, I still think North Carolina and Texas are high on that list, but we don't know it won't be a South Dakota. We don't know it won't be an Oklahoma. We don't know it won't be an Arkansas. And so I think it's really important that there is that voting rights advocates are not just myopically looking at the states that may be on the immediate electoral map, but are really looking where the harms are.
And Mark, a point you made earlier is that it's important to challenge bad laws wherever they are. You have told this story a couple times. I don't know if we've ever said it on YouTube, but remember when Georgia enacted SB 202 and they had a line warming ban, Georgia was kind of like, why are you suing us? New York has the same rule and y'all aren't doing anything about that state. And it turns out New York for many, many years has had a line warming ban. Lawmakers tried to overturn it before, it wasn't happening. But the fact is, New York has really outdated and in some cases archaic voting laws. And that's why that state had nearly 30 voting rights lawsuits filed in it from 2020 to 2024.
Yeah, I mean, New York is one of those states on the list that people probably are surprised by. And that's because it had highly competitive House races, right? Remember, there was a lot of talk about control of the House going through New York. And also because the Republicans are trying to make it harder to vote in a state that was incrementally getting better. And frankly, my team and I brought some litigation in New York, including to strike down that line warming ban. Yes, we brought the lawsuit and we won. And so that ban is no longer in place in New York. And so that was a state that, the voting laws got better over as a result of litigation, but there still is not enough being done. There are still lots of states like West Virginia, Wyoming, Arkansas, states that where there could be a lot more being done than is being done now, along with the states that have seen no litigation. The three that you mentioned have seen no litigation. But Paige, I want to end this video on a bit of a more optimistic note. So I'm going to sort of turn the table a little bit. And I know that one of the questions that people are going to have is, okay, so this is a good video for lawyers to know what to do next, which is they should be looking for, cases to bring, or they should be vindicating the right to vote in court and other legal rights in court. But what people are going to want to know is what they can do. Like, what is it if you are not a lawyer and you're just watching this video and you're like, yeah, I do live in one of those states, and this doesn't seem fair, and I don't like the fact that I have to wait in line, or why don't we have ballot drop boxes, or why is there no excuse absentee voting, by gosh, in my state? Like, what should people do?
Mark, this is one of those areas where litigation is a great tool, but even better is changing the laws and going the legislation route. So if you haven't already, you should be working with voting rights groups in your own state to testify against bad voting rights bills when they come up, to testify in support of good voting bills when they come up in your state legislature, and also work with your local election officials to try to make the process easier. Is it harder for them to offer more hours of early voting or a greater number of polling locations because they don't have the number of poll workers they need to support all that? That's something you can help out with immediately by becoming a poll worker, right? Is there a language access barrier in your community when it comes to voting? Can you work with a civil rights group or with election officials again to bridge that barrier? There are things you can do in your community, in your state legislature, even if you aren't a lawyer, that can have a really big difference when it comes to helping someone be able to cast their ballot.
All right, so there you have it. That's what's happening. That's why we need to expand the map. And Paige is just giving you a bunch of stuff you can do, and I'm going to add one more. You should subscribe to Democracy Docket. It is a free news and information site that I created in 2020. It has since added free and premium newsletters. Subscribe on the link above or in the show notes below. If you want to just try it out, become a free member. If you know you like it, or maybe you're already a free member, sign up for premium. It helps make sure that the Democracy Docket team has the resources to do all of their important work. Thanks for watching this episode. We'll see you next time.